Hello everyone, here's another discussion for ACC9 construction contracts. So, I'm so sorry kasi hindi nyo makikita ang aking face sa discussion, pero I try real hard to be very animated during our discussion. So, parang podcast lang to. Okay, so I have technical difficulties regarding the device capturing my video. Okay, so kaya screen lang yung nare-record ko. I'm not even sure if recording siya. Yeah, it's recording. Anyway, so let's start with construction contracts. I have decided to magkaiba yung discussion sa theories at saka sa application niya. So, sa guided exercises ko, ibibigay lahat ng examples. Okay, for now, it's just the theories. Okay, so let's start with ano ba yung mga standards na binaon sa limot ni PFRS 15 char. Kasi construction contracts is now governed by PFRS 15. Before, the following standards were used. PAS 18, PAS 11. You can see that merong previous standard regarding construction contracts with the PFRS 15 being present today, wala na siyang bearing. Okay? IFRIC 13, IFRIC 15, IFRIC 18, and then SIC 31 revenue barter transaction involving advertising services. So, you have already graphs na kaya nagkaroon ng PFRS 15, okay, is because masyadong maraming kinoconsider, okay, in the past, okay. So, in order for the accountants to be well guided and for the complete and for the faithful representation of transactions relating to construction contracts, nagkaroon na ng PFRS 15. Okay? So, ano ba nga itong PFRS 15? As discussed sa previous nating lesson, okay, regarding the PFRS 15 5-step model. So, we have, shall be applied to contracts wherein the counterparty is a customer. So, dinefine kung anong contract. Okay, it's an agreement between two or more parties that creates enforceable rights. So, alam niyo na yan. Customer, syempre, is a party that has contracted with an entity to obtain goods or services that are an output of the entity's ordinary activities. Okay? So, the core principle of PFRS 15 is actually to recognize revenue, okay? To depict the transfer of promised goods, okay? To customers in an amount that reflects the consideration to which the entity expects to be entitled in exchange for those. In summary, gusto mo kasing malaman if magkanong revenue yung i-recognize ko regarding the receipt of goods or services, or even the selling of goods and services, if it falls under conditions na mapapaisip ka. Will I recognize it at a point in time, or dahil nakikinabang ako throughout the years, will I recognize the revenue continuously? Okay, so at an extended period of time. Okay, so yun yung core principle ni PFRS 15 para guided tayo when are we going to recognize revenue and for how much. Okay? Next, we have steps in the revenue recognition. So, you are familiar with this na. Okay, so we have step 1. Again, just to refresh, you have the contract. Identify the contract with the customer. Okay? Identify next, step 2, the performance obligations in the contract. Step 3, determine the transaction price. Step 4, allocate the transaction price to the performance obligations. And step 5, recognize revenue when or as the entity satisfies the performance obligation. Before, yung ginagamit namin, yung lumang standard, wala yung performance obligation. Okay, kanya-kanyang standard si construction contract, si franchise accounting. Okay, ngayon, they are now under PFRS 15 and more topics to come. Okay? So, let's apply this 5-step model in construction contracts. So, first is identify the contract. So, ano ba itong construction contract? So, syempre, meron ka na in mind kung anong construction contract. So, mga buildings, nagpapagawa, it's a construction of an asset. okay, or a combination of assets that are closely interrelated in terms of their design, technology, and function of their ultimate purpose. Ma'am, is it limited to construction of buildings, of houses, okay, of yung mga nakikita natin sa paligid, yung mga halatang construction. So, it's not actually limited doon kasi pwede kang construction of prototype. Okay, yung mga machines na ginagamit, yung mga equipment, okay, yung mga kalsada, yung mga dams, yan. They are actually also considered as construction contract. So, wag mo lang iisipin na building lang yung kino-construct. Okay? So, yan. Then we have here combination of contracts. So, bakit binanggit yung combination of contracts? So, kasi mayroong mga kontrata na tawag din mukhang madami, okay, pero para hindi na masyadong magulo yung usapan, ginawa nilang package deal. So, sabi ng standard, if there's a combination of contracts, each contract is accounted for separately. Okay, pero, okay, syempre, merong pero yan. Pero, 2 or more contracts entered into at or near the same time with the same customer, okay, shall be combined and accounted for as a single contract if, so these are the contracts are negotiated as a package deal na. So, sabi, o sige, ako magtatayo ng foundation, ako magtatayo ng mismong bahay, ako din yung magpipintura, ako na din yung mag-interior design, okay, ako na yung magla-landscaping, okay, with a single commercial objective. Bakit ikaw na yung gagawa ng lahat, okay, para kasi, ayaw yung branding, okay, so yung branding na lang, okay, the amount of construction to be paid in one contract depends on the price or performance of the other contract, so magkadugtong. Kumbaga is, depende dun sa isa yung ibabayad ko ngayon. Okay? Some or all of the goods or services promised in the contracts are single performance obligation. Yan. Kapag identified siya as a single performance obligation lang, okay, yung goods or services na matatanggap mo from the from the combination of the contracts, okay, siya ay pag gagawin mong package deal na, okay. Pero other than this, okay, hindi siya nag-fall dito or even here, hindi na siya nag-fall here, dito siya papatak. Okay, accounted for separately. Okay? Next, step 2, we identify the performance obligations in the contract. So, each promise in the contract to transfer a distinct good or services is treated as a separate performance obligation. So, depende yan sa kontrata, ha? Okay? If the kontrata tells you na, okay, ang matatanggap mo after the construction is a prototype na na meant or na sinunod yung design mo, yung specifications na binigay mo. So, that's a separate performance obligation if meron ka ding pinagawang, for example, similar asset, okay, pero similar assets, so same din yung contractor mo, pero alam mong iba yung paggagamitan. Okay? So, separate performance obligation siya. So, hindi dependent yung isang asset mo, yung fulfillment ng isang asset mo, construction ng isang asset mo dun sa construction ng isa. So, that's distinct. Okay? Yung good or service. Okay? However, if dependent yung construction ng isa dun sa isa, hindi magagawa yung si A kung wala si B, okay? Hindi siya separate performance obligation. Okay? So, just remember the PFRS 5-step 5-step model in arriving kung alin ba ang separate performance obligation. Okay? So, next, this one, determine the transaction price. So, dito tayo sa construction contracts. Alin ba ang transaction price? So, binigay lang yung definition ng transaction price according to PFRS. So, this is the amount of the consideration which the entity expects to be entitled in exchange for transferring promised goods, okay, excluding amounts collected on behalf of the third parties. Kasi, di ba, pinag-aralan yun sa tax, may withholding tax, okay? Yung withholding tax na yun, hindi siya kasama sa sa transaction price kasi you are collecting it on behalf of BIR. Okay? So the consideration may include fixed amounts, variable amounts, or both. Okay? So in construction contract, the transaction price is the construction price, the contract price. So magkakapirmahan naman yan before magsimula yung construction of either building or equipment, okay? So, any subsequent variations in the contract. So, pag-aaralan natin, ano ba itong variations na to? In the contract price to the extent that it's probable that will result in revenue and they're capable of being measured reliably. Okay? So, nagkaroon ng subsequent variation like changes in materials, changes in price, changes in changes. Okay? So, yan. Kasama siya sa transaction price. Now, also, a construction contract may be either a fixed price contract. So, ito yung mga kontrata na, okay, deal, nagkapirmahan tayo, 1 million yung deemed price of the project, 1 million lang. Okay? So, hindi siya lalabis, hindi siya kukulang. Fixed price contract. Okay? So, yung isa naman, the cost plus contract, actually may two types of that. That's the cost plus variable fee contract and the cost plus fixed fee contract. Okay? So, pag-aaralan natin yan mamaya. So, dito, parang if there is dagdag, okay, because nagkaroon ng aberya, hindi naman talaga nagkaroon ng aberya, deemed na mas mararating yung pinag-usapan na goods and services, the desired goods and services sa kontrata, okay, the construction contract, if we're going to create subsequent variations, we're going to adjust certain conditions sa kontrata and it will incur cost. Okay, so yeah, that's the types of it. Then next, we allocate the transaction price to the performance obligation. That's step 4. Okay? So dito, sabi nga ni PFRS 15, hinahanap yung relative standalone prices of the distinct goods and services promised. Okay? So this is the price at which a promised goods can be sold separately to a customer. Okay? So, i-allocate mo lang. Sanay na naman tayo mag-allocate ng basket price, okay, using the ratios na derived from relative standalone selling prices. Okay? So, yan. Then, step 5, we recognize revenue when or as the entity satisfied a performance obligation. So, ito nga yun eh. When will we recognize revenue? Okay? Sabi, you recognize revenue when it satisfies a performance obligation. Eh, kailan nga? Okay? So, revenue is measured at the amount of transaction prices allocated to the satisfied performance obligation. I can say na mas madali yung PFRS 15 year compared before. Okay? Parang pares lang naman sila mahirap, char. Okay? This one kasi is medyo simple lang siyang gawin. Okay, kasi i-allocate mo lang yung transaction price dun sa satisfied ng performance obligation. Okay? Before kasi may mga considerations pa eh. Okay? Anyway. So we have, how do you measure progress? Okay? Para malaman mo na satisfied yung performance obligation. Okay? So for this one, yung revenue daw, sabi, for each performance obligation satisfied over time, an entity shall recognize revenue over time by measuring the progress towards completion of the satisfaction. Okay, for example, your project is deemed 10 years bago makompleto. Okay, will you recognize revenue sa simula pa lang ng taon? Okay, or will you recognize revenue after 10 years time? Okay? So, pag ganon, di ba parang mapapaisip ka, oo nga, no? Kailan ko i-recognize yung revenue if my client has entered into a construction contract that is meant to last for 10 years? Okay? If ni-recognize ko na siya ng ngayon, okay, yung aking client, para namang hindi pa niya ramdam yung revenue eh. So, ibig sabihin, pag nag-recognize na ako ng revenue ngayon, maganda yung performance ko this year. Okay, how about next year? Mag-zero out na agad siya. Okay, hahabulin ako ni BIR na nangyayari sa'yo. Okay? So, nag-recognize ka ng revenue ngayon, nasa ng pera? Okay? So, ano naman, if hinintay mo siya for 10 years time, ano nangyayari? Baka pag-initan ka ng mga agencies na why is it in 10 years time you're still operating pero parang you're not declaring any profit, okay, over the course, you're not declaring any revenue over time, okay, so tas biglang boom 10 years malaki agad ang revenue mo, okay, so parang hindi siya komportableng gawin ano pag ganun. So kaya nga sabi, revenue is recognized over time by measuring the progress. Okay? Matching principle. Okay? So we have examples of acceptable measurement methods. We have the input method and the output. Ang input method is you are looking for the relationship between the cost incurred. So ang basihan mo dito ay cost incurred at saka total expected cost. Okay? Siyempre, as an accountant, makakatrabaho mo dito mga engineer. Okay? Okay, if you are involved with constructions of certain PPEs and buildings, okay? So, dahil hindi naman talaga required sa isang CPA na alam mo yung mga engineering stuff, okay? So, you have to deal with engineers, okay? Para malaman mo yung specifications that will be the basis of your computation, okay? So, sa kanya yung specification, sa iyo yung computation ng revenue. Okay. Don't worry, makakatrabaho niyo yung mga yun. So, next is the output method. So, the surveys of work performed. So, mamaya discuss natin yung output methods. Doon muna tayo sa inputs. Okay, sa inputs method, this is recognize revenue on the basis of efforts or inputs. Okay, efforts, kung anong binibigay mo. Expended relative to the total expected input. So, this is actually actual. Paano sulat ko? Actual versus expected. Okay? Needed in fully satisfy a performance. You can actually see this na, kunwari, biglang bumagyo, isang linggong bumagyo. Siyempre, halt lahat or tigil lahat ng construction activities mo, even sa prototypes. Okay? So, siyempre, meron kang timetable. Yung expected inputs mo, delayed. Okay? So, siyempre, yung progress mo, delayed din. So, how will you measure the revenue pag ganon? Okay, so yan. So, examples of efforts or inputs include cost incurred, resources consumed, labor hours, machine hours, and time elapsed. Okay, so maalin dyan, depende naman yun sa narration or sa usapan if alin yung magiging basis mo, kung cost incurred, kung resources ba na consume mo na, yung mga semento ba, yung mga pako ba, okay, labor hours expended, kung gaano kadaming oras na ba yung na dalaan ng mga laborers mo sa construction, machine hours, okay, and then time elapsed. So we have here the cost to cost. So you are given formulas for the computation of percentage of completion. Okay, so we have total cost incurred to date. Okay, this is actually the actual. Yan. Total cost incurred to date divided by estimated contract cost. Estimated total. Okay, total. So, ang lalabas dyan, percentage. Okay? The percentage is used, multiply mo siya sa total revenue. Okay? So, sa total contract price. Total revenue. Sa total contract price to arrive at the total revenue to be recognized according to the progress. Okay? So, ibabangga mo lang siya doon sa transaction price, makukuha mo yung i-recognize mo dapat na revenue for that year. I don't know if you're hearing the dogs. Ewan ko. Parang barking galore sila ngayon. Anyway. So, this one, there's a variation kasi syempre, nag-evolve ang mga problem solving. So, nagkaroon ng variation. So, we have percentage of completion is equal to the total cost incurred to date. So, that's actually the actual na. And then, total cost incurred to date, okay, plus estimated cost to complete. Okay? If hindi kasi bigay ito, malamang ibibigay itong dalawang ito. Okay, so may variation. At least binigay ko na din yung variation para hindi na kayo na, alam ko, ano nakukuha yun. Okay? So, ma'am, ano ba yung mga cost na dapat naming abangan? Okay? So, the cost na dapat yung abangan or the contract costs include the following. So, we have incremental cost of obtaining a contract, okay, recognized as asset if they are recoverable and avoidable. As a practical expedient, basta, the costs are recognized as expense if there are expected to be amortization period is 1 year or less. Okay, so that's incremental cost of obtaining a contract. Okay, and then we have also cost to fulfill a contract. So sabi, yung cost daw will fall under cost to fulfill a contract if they fulfill the following criteria. Tatlo yon. Una, directly related siya sa contract. Padalwa, they generate or enhance the resources to be used. And patatlo, they are recoverable. Okay? So, ano ba yung mga examples ng cost to be recognized? So, wait. Papasadahan ko. Examples of costs directly related to the contract is direct materials, direct labor, okay, other costs like payment to subcontractors, cost of moving plant, cost of hiring plant equipment, cost of design, technical costs that are explicitly chargeable to the customer. Yun talagang cost na will directly attributable to the contract. Even insurance of the construction is included. Okay, may insurance. Oo naman, may insurance yan. Okay, kaya nga, mahal magpa-gawa ng bahay ngayon. Okay, building, lalo na kapag yung mga for business, kasi insurance kasama. Okay lang yun. It's an investment. Okay? Next, we have output method. Ano ba tong output method? Dito naman, this is used, ang basis ay direct measurements of value to the customer of goods or services transferred to date relative to the remaining. So, examples nito ay surveys of performance completed. So, sinasurvey kung gaano na ba kadami yung natapos nila. Okay? Gaano na ba karami or marami na bang progress. Okay, yung delivery ba doon sa gusto ng customer is malapit-lapit na or hindi? So, survey performance completed. And appraisal of results. Okay, so, ina-appraise if pinapaka-value yung valuation niya. Okay, pag tinignan is magkano na kaya ito as of late. Okay, milestones reached. So, ginagawa ng baseline project plan and doon nakalagay yung mga milestones reached nila. So, kailan mo ba masasabing 20% complete, 50% complete, 70% complete? Okay? So, yun yung mga milestones. Time elapsed. So, may timeline. Okay? Mahirap kasi kapag timeline eh. So, pag timeline yung basis mo, maaaring hindi siya matapos at tamang panahon. Okay? Okay? So, yon. Units produced or units delivered. Yan. So, if you're actually doing the units produced or units delivered, you have to be careful with this kasi masyado maraming info ang ibibigay dyan. Okay? Yun, that's output method. So, kailan siya ginagamit? Pag ginagamit siya, kapag computation of high-rise buildings, dams, bridges, and other structure wherein the incurrence of cost is not necessarily proportionate to the entity's progress on the contract. Okay, syempre, depende kasi, ito tong mga high-rise buildings, dams, and bridges, matagalan kasi ang paggagawa niyan. Okay, so, yung proportionality ng progress dun sa incurrence of cost is hindi talaga siya magtutugma. Okay, kaya malimit na ginagamit is output method. Pero, sabi ng standard, as an accountant or as an CPA, you have to be well-versed with the input method. Okay, kasi yun ang malimit gamitin. Okay? Next. So, knowing all of that, ito bang contract, paano natin i-represent siya sa statement of financial position? So, a contract where either party has performed is presented in the statement of financial position as a contract liability, contract asset, or receivable. So, contract liability siya kapag it is an entity's obligation to transfer goods or services to a customer for which the entity has received consideration. So, naka-receive na siya ng amount, okay? nabayaran siya advance, okay? Then, nagkaroon siya ng obligation to fulfill. Para siyang unearned revenue, okay? Contract asset siya kapag the entity's right to consideration in exchange for the goods or services the entity has transferred to a consumer or that right is conditioned on something other than the passage of time. So, kapag may condition, okay? Hindi regulatory, okay? Pwede naman regulatory, okay? So, mayroong condition set na kapag ito ay naganap or kapag ito ay hindi naganap, okay, may ibabalik ka sa akin pera, or mababawasan yung contract price. So, contract asset, okay? Then we have receivable. This is an entity's right to consideration that is unconditional. So, if based on the contract, kung saan siya mag-fall by definition, yun yung tatawag mo sa kanya. Contract liability, contract asset, or receivable. Okay? So, we have changes in measure of progress. So, syempre, hindi naman kasi mawawala yung mga changes na yan kasi you have to be very, very flexible in dealing in business. Okay? The measure of progress shall be updated as circumstances change over time. Okay? Such changes are accounted for prospectively. Remember that prospectively, you don't have to change everything from the start. Okay, paano kapag 20 years project? So, you're going to go to year 1? No. Prospectively and change kasi accounted siya as accounting estimate. Okay? Next, cost recovery approach. So, ano to? If the income of the performance obligation that is satisfied over time cannot be measured reliably, revenue shall be recognized only to the extent of costs incurred that are expected to be recovered. Okay? Kasi mangyayari ito, biglang hindi na lang kayang i-satisfy yung construction contract, iniwan na lang siyang nandun, natenga na siya, nagkaroon tuloy ng problema si accountant that the outcome of the performance obligation cannot be reliably measured kung magkano ba yung value niya. Okay, so pag ganon, ang gagawin na ni accountant to close the books, actually hindi naman to close the books, to account for these circumstances is to account it using the cost recovery approach or the zero profit method. Bakit zero profit? Malamang sa malamang lugi ka dyan. Okay, kasi hindi na-deliver yung performance obligation. Okay? Yung pwede lang, the extent of the cost incurred, okay, ay ibabangga mo siya sa expected to be recovered. Yun yung talagang zero profit method na gagawin. So, we'll deal with this at the exercises kung paano siya. Masakit sa pusong gawin to, pero talagang kailangan, okay, to close the books. Okay? Next, we have onerous contract. So, sa onerous contract, a construction contract becomes onerous if the expected cost in fulfilling the performance obligation exceed the transaction price. Okay? So, hindi to maiwasang mangyari. Okay? Na mas marami yung cost kaysa doon sa transaction price. The entity recognizes and measures the present obligation under onerous contract as a provision. Okay? Kasi, ihahanda mo na yung sarili mo sa mga expected cost na padating. Okay? So, yung transaction price binigay sa iyo, pero due to unavoidable circumstances, in order for the performance obligation to be fulfilled, expected cost, additional cost shall be accounted for, and nung na-compute mo, it exceed the transaction price. It's an onerous contract. Okay? So, it should be accounted for as a provision. Okay? Under an onerous contract as a provision. Present obligation, ha? Variable consideration. So, ano ba itong variable consideration? If the consideration includes a variable amount, the entity shall estimate the amount to which it is entitled in exchange. So, alin ba dito mahalaga? Yan. Constraining estimates of variable consideration principle. Ano ba itong principle na ito? Sabi, the estimated amount of the variable consideration will be included in the transaction price only to the extent that is highly probable that a significant reversal in the amount of cumulative revenue recognized will not occur when uncertainty associated with the variable consideration is subsequently resolved. Okay? So, dito, yung may prinsipyo kasing pina-follow, which is this one, na ang i-include mo lang the variable consideration will be included if it is highly probable na yung reversal ng amount will not occur. Okay, if na-resolve yung problema. So, ma'am, ano ba yung variable consideration na yan? Ito yung mga penalties, incentive payments, cost escalations, mga cost escalations na yan. Okay, kasi hindi mo maiwasan na yung billing of materials is tumaas ang cost. Okay, or even the value of the, the value of the materials. Okay, so kailan lang siya magiging included sa transaction price? Kapag, again, it is highly probable. Okay, balikan natin. Highly probable, only to the extent that it is highly probable that a significant reversal in the amount of cumulative revenue recognized will not occur when the uncertainty associated with the variable. Hindi ko pa rin mag-gets. Okay, so sa example natin, mag-gets niyan. Okay? Yan, contract modification, changes. Okay? Ang tawag din sa kanya is change order, variation, and amendment. Bakit change order? Kasi yung malimit kasi ang ginagawa sa construction is yung job order. Okay, so change order, variation, and amendment. So a contract modification is a change in scope and or price of a contract that is approved by the contracting parties. Okay, approved to ha. Sabi, in writing, orally, or implied. Okay, mas maganda if you were consulted by your you were asked for advice by your entity, by your client, if contract modification is ideal, at sabi mo yes, be it in writing. Kasi mamaya magkaturuan na kaya kumaunti yung revenue to be recognized is because pumayag ka dun sa contract modification na yon. Okay, masisi ka pa. So, mas magandang in writing siya. Okay? So, it is accounted for. So, yung contract modification kasi pwedeng maging part pa rin siya ng existing o di kaya naman sa sobrang laki yung modification niya or nagkaroon na ng distinct performance obligation sa kanya, nagkaroon na siya ng bagong kontrata. So, it is accounted for as a separate contract if the modification results to additional goods or services that are distinct and the modified contract price reflects the standalone selling price. So, nadagdagan siya. Okay? And nung nadagdagan siya, nagkaroon siya ng sariling standalone selling prices. Okay? So, yung additional goods and services na yun, i-separate mo na lang siyang kontrata. So, account for the existing contract as it is. So, yung dating kontrata nyo, you still you still account it the way it is. Pero itong modification, i-account mo na lang siya as a separate contract. Okay? Kasi nagkaroon ng additional goods and services na masyadong distinct at mayroong sariling standalone selling prices as a new and separate contract. So, you still use PFRS 15 for this new separate contract. Okay? Pero, dalawa ng kontrata yung hawak mo. Isang existing at isang bago because of the contract modification. Okay? Dito naman, so, if the modification is a termination of an existing contract and the creation of a new contract. Okay, so, magkakaroon ng termination ng existing contract and creation of a new contract. So, mawawala yung dati, merong bago. Mawawala yung dati, merong bago. If and only if, the additional goods and services are distinct. Okay, so parehas siya ng una. Pero, the modified contract price does not reflect the standalone selling prices of those additional goods. So, kanina, parehas distinct and with standalone selling prices. Dito, walang, the modified contract price does not reflect the standalone selling prices. So, paano mo siya i-account? Account as if na-terminate yung luma at merong bagong kontrata. The balance of the transaction price ng original contract plus yung consideration or yung bagong bayad for the modification of the contract, okay, syempre, may dagdag yan sa transaction price, okay, or bawas, okay, hindi, dagdag, okay, allocated to the remaining performance obligation. So, this should be accounted for, okay, yung balance kasi to-terminate mo na yung existing contract, so, saan mapunta yung, ni-recognize mong, yung balance ng transaction price na, syempre, i-allocate mo na siya dun sa remaining performance obligations, okay. Next, we have the last one is Yan. Ito pala ulit lang. Okay, anyway. So, we have, as if the modification is part of the existing contract. So, walang mababago, walang mawawala, walang mawawalang kontrata. It's still as is. Okay? Existing contract siya kapag daw, the additional goods and services are not distinct. So, parang walang nangyari. So, existing contract pa rin siya. The effect of the modification is accounted for prospectively, catch-up adjustment to revenue. So, prospectively lang yung application niya. Okay? So, parang idadagdag mo lang siya or babawas mo lang siya as sa revenue. Okay? So, parang wala lang. Okay? Dinagdagan lang. Parang wala lang, naisip ko lang. Kasi hindi nakalagay sa kontrata eh. So, yun. Okay? So, I hope it's clear here. Sarap kasi mag-aral ng theories eh. Sana theories na lang lahat. Char! Okay? Claims for reimbursement on the contract. So, a claim is an amount that the contractor seeks to collect from the customer or another party as reimbursements of costs not included in the contract price. So, sa ulo to. Kapag yung contractor mo ay may sinisingil sa iyo dahil nagastos siya, okay? So, alam niyo naman, are you familiar with construction contracts? Malimit kasi. 50-50 lang ang bayaran niyan or 20% or cost, yung billings lang ng materials muna ang babayaran, okay? Before the other payment. So, malimit, contractor ang gumagastos dyan. Ngayon, si contractor, nakakagastos yan na wala sa kontrata. Okay? Pero he deemed it necessary for the completion of the project. Okay? So, may claims yan. Okay? For reimbursement. For example, merong manggagawa si contractor na biglang due to hindi pumayag yung may-ari or yung client na magkaroon ng personal protective equipment yung mga laborers, okay? At si contractor naman is meron siyang binibigay pero it's not enough kasi special project siya, okay? An aksidente. So, nag-claim siya pina-hospital niya, nag-claim siya ng reimbursement galing sa client kasi sa tingin niya, kasalanan ni client kung bakit na aksidente kasi hindi niya sinuportahan yung kanyang paniniwala na dapat dagdagan niya yung PPE ng uh, mga laborers. Okay, so that's a claim. If the entity has an enforceable right to the claim, the entity shall account for the claim as a contract modification. So, pwede naman siyang ipasok as a contract modification. Okay? Depende yun sa galing ng accountant. Okay? Malimit kasi tayo yung mag-a-advise sa kanila na, for example, accountant, ay may pinapabayaran sa akin aring si contractor. Hindi naman kasama sa kontrata eh. Okay, hindi naman napag-usapan. May babayad-bayad pa ganyan. Sabi mo, wag na po magligalig. Pwede po yung ipasok as contract modification. Okay, so magpag-uusapan nyo na lang kung paano yung bayaran doon. Okay? Lalo na if may sponsor naman sa pagbabayad. So yun. Uncertainty in the collectibility of the contract revenue. Oh my God. This is usually the problem ng mga contractors. Paano kapag there is uncertainty in the collectability of the contract revenue? So, if the uncertainty of the collectability of contract revenue arises at contract inception, the entity does not recognize any revenue from the contract. Any consideration received is recognized as a liability. So, kapag, alam mo, sa simula pa lang, ay hindi mo na makokolekta yung contract revenue. This happened during the pandemic, wherein projects that involve or ang party na nagpapagawa is government is nag-pull out sila, okay, ng kanilang mga funds for such projects because ilalaan na lang yung funds for realign yung budget for COVID-19 response. Okay? So, hindi siya pumatak dito actually sa contract inception. Dito siya, subsequent to contract inception. Okay? Kasi, for example, 10 years na 5 taon na yung project. So, if 10 years yung estimated time of completion ng project, so, subsequent siya. Pero, kapag biglang pumasok si government sa kontrata during the time of the pandemic at biglang sabi on that day mismo, okay, on the day mismo sinabi ng Congress na i-realign ng budget at kasama yung project na yun sa hindi na tatanggalan na ng budget, okay, yung binigay na bayad sa'yo within the day, it becomes a liability na. Okay? So, yun yun. So, pero kapag siya subsequent, okay, so, sa nagdaan ng panahon, pag government, nawala ng funding, pag naman private, na bankrupt, okay? So, the uncollectibility is an impairment to trade or receivable or contract asset. Impairment siya, okay? So, yon, uncollectible na siya. Kakayak yun. So, ay, tapos na pala. So, yun lang, napasarap ang kwentuhan. Hopefully, hindi ka inantok. Okay? So, yun lang naman sa theories na dapat malaman nyo. Actually, mas gusto ko si PFRS 15 kesa dun sa ginagawa namin before. Ano? So, see you sa guided exercises for the examples ng lahat ng diniscuss natin. We put it into application. Okay? So, bye guys!